So let's talk about some possible next steps for your congregation. Number one, if you have a hospital visitation team, what kind of training or experience have you provided them with? I'm sure you've selected, if you have a team like this, you've selected people with big hearts that have some experience. But is there some kind of purposeful training or curriculum that you could take them through? Number two, can you commit to advanced care planning in some way in your congregation? So perhaps this is you as a leader or you as a small group person having that conversation yourself and then beginning to just talk about that possibility with other people in your congregation. Number three, maybe you need to work through your own feelings of loss and grief. So this is very intensely personal. But when we've talked about grief, are there things that come up for you that are still fresh? And maybe you need to sit down yourself as a leader and set that example that it's time sometimes to really sit down and work through our own personal grief and loss. Number four, role play hard conversations. One of the worst parts about walking into a difficult situation is we don't have a lot of experience with these end-of-life conversations or how do we find meaning in the midst of phase 3 sort of conversations. So find a trusted friend, sit down with him or her, and role play what that might be like, especially if you know you're going to support someone who's in that situation themselves. Number five, call your local hospital, ask if they have chaplains, and if they do, ask if you could shadow a chaplain for a short time. All you're going to do is walk around and see what their work is, but you may gain a world of insight from spending 4 or 8 hours with a hospital chaplain, seeing what they do, and that may inform how you support people in their time of crisis. Number six, maybe you can partner up for training. Maybe you want to go more in depth with one of these topics or just the topic of how to support people in times of crisis overall. But bringing people together around this topic can be more helpful when we choose another congregation that's near us or another organization that may also benefit from this kind of training. Set something up and give yourselves the opportunity to really learn and discuss how you support people in times of crisis. Number seven, plan a teaching time. We don't plan a lot of sermon series or Sunday school classes centered around grief, death, and loss. But what if we did? And we gave people an opportunity to talk about that. We're not the best at approaching this subject in our culture sometimes, but if we do it purposefully, we can begin to move the needle on how we have these conversations. Number eight, launch a support group. You don't have to be a trained mental health counselor to lead a good grief support group. There's lots of easy to access tools out there, and honestly, if you just have someone who's willing to listen and care and pray and organize the time, you could launch a support group in no time. Begin to communicate to people that if they've had grief or they've experienced loss of this kind or just in general, that they can come into that support group and receive that kind of support. Number nine, study clinical ethics. The world of clinical ethics has all sorts of resources on it, and begin to dive into some of that so that you can understand some of these more complex situations and how to coach people through them before you find yourself in the middle of that situation. Last but not least, number 10, study chaplaincy. The world of healthcare chaplaincy has a lot of materials as well. It will help you to think through a different lens. Sometimes in the congregational setting, we're more used to coaching people through phase 2. How do you overcome difficulties with God's help? And less acquainted with coaching people in phase 3 of finding meaning in suffering. But healthcare chaplaincy is rife with examples of how to help people in that phase 3. Included in the course notes is a PDF with all these different options that your congregation could choose as a next step for how to support people in phase 3. That PDF will give you a fuller description and more examples of what you could do to help people in their times of crisis.